Hello, thank you for joining us so much. I am thrilled about today's guest, today's interview. Um, as you know, I spoke last week. I showed the video of my interview with John Shipton, Julian Assange's father, or was it 2 weeks ago? And now I will be speaking with Julian Assange's wife, Stella Assange. She's also a very accomplished lawyer as well and has been working with WikiLeaks for a long time. And yeah, I think we're just going to, I don't think that needs much more introduction than that. So please welcome Stella Assange. Hello.
Hi, Lee.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I hope your new year has been as happy as it can be under the circumstances. I really hope this is the year where we see Julian free. I guess I'll start with probably a question that's on a lot of people's mind, which is simply, how is his health?
Well, it's in steady decline. He's been in Belmarsh prison for over 3.5 years, since the 11th of April 2019. And obviously, this has a detrimental effect on your health. Any time, any day you spend in isolation affects your mental health, as you can imagine. Julian is stuck in a cell for over 20 hours a day and on his own. And so obviously over time, this has a terrible effect on your health. Even before he went into Belmarsh, his liberty was restricted. He was living inside the Ecuadorian embassy, which didn't have any open space, no direct sunlight, no fresh air. So he was already in a state of physical deterioration and mental deterioration before he went into Belmarsh prison. I saw him this morning, and the Christmas period is also one of isolation, because some days are holidays for the prison, so for the staff. So that means the prison is understaffed and there are no visits on the Christmas days and so on. So it ends up being a period of isolation rather than celebration or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, he's had a tough. The past weeks have been tough because of things slowing down in the prison and him not having the regular visits and it being short of staff, which means the prison doesn't really function very well and so on.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I can't imagine, and it highlights something that a lot of people have said, which is solitary confinement, and confinement like this is a form of torture, which supposedly many countries have claimed that they no longer practice. But of course, this is torture. I wanted to ask you about. It was a bit of a kind of viral clip of the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Company's global affairs editor, John Lyons, saying that he expects Julian Assange to be released in the next 2 months. And he just said this a week or two ago. And this is someone who has connections in the Australian government. And so I'm wondering if you can comment on that and whether you've heard anything like that.
Well, I've followed what's circulating on the internet. He's a very distinguished journalist, and I can't independently corroborate or anything like that. I'm not privy to any further information. Just what I've just observed what he's said online, and mm-hmm. What I have noticed is that there's kind of an expectation building from different directions among the media, an expectation that something is going to happen, and that probably comes from the Australian end of things, because for years and years, the Australian government just was a facilitator for the US persecution of Julian. And the new Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, when he was running for Prime Minister, said that he was opposed to Julian's continued incarceration. And then once he was elected, he reiterated his position. And initially he said that he wasn't going to conduct diplomacy with a loudhailer. And then in late November, he actually made some pretty strong statements in the Australian Parliament. So that was a change. That was a shift, going from kind of quiet diplomacy to stating his position publicly. So it's always been certainly Julian's father's and Australian part of the family's position that Australia holds the key to Julian's freedom. Because if you have a state backing you, a government backing you, then you're in an entirely different position to having no backing at all. And you're just an individual, and, you know, an individual and the individual's family members and so on, supporting your case. And I mean, I don't mean to say that the public support is insignificant. It's the opposite. The only reason why the Australian Prime Minister or politicians, there are quite a few, there's a big contingent now in Australia of politicians who are opposed to this, to Julian's imprisonment and prosecution. That comes from public support, from public mobilization, from people writing to candidates, writing to sitting, serving politicians, saying, what are you doing about the situation? And acting on it, either electing or deselecting people who are not backing Julian. And so the shift in terms of the powerful forces at play, I think, can mostly be explained by this change of approach by the Australian government. It's a very good sign. That's not to say that that anything is for certain. The only time when it's going to be, you know, when the only result is Julian's freedom, and he's not yet free. So I caution against people sitting back and thinking, well, you know, it's in someone else's hands now, the big players and so on. It's the opposite. Now is the time to kind of double down and make demands for Julian's freedom as loud as possible until Julian steps out of Belmarsh prison a free man, and that has to happen soon.
Yeah, and you speaking of the all the support has influenced the politics around it, and I saw the movie Ithaca about you and John Shipton. I highly recommend everyone check it out, and about your ongoing fight. It's excellent. In it, you say that this extradition trial, and maybe I can't remember if you say most extradition trials are about 1% legal and 99% political, and more of a vibe, the environment around it. I think a lot of people would find that shocking, and so I'm wondering if you could talk a little more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is let's see. I mean, you can look at it from different angles, but specifically the US-UK extradition treaty is a piece of legislation that came out of the September 11th attacks. I mean, within a couple of months, the treaty was hashed out, and basically it's a fast track it happened within the European Union as well. Well, we're going to trust the jurisdictions of our allies. We won't ask any questions. It's basically for terrorists, right? And then immediately, extraditions then started becoming easier. And because the legislation has basically no safeguards, then the individual has no protections. And so for the US-UK extradition treaty, there is no, for example, the UK courts don't look at any prima facie evidence. They just take the affidavits, the statements by the US prosecutors. They don't interrogate the elements of those statements, and you can't cross-examine them. And then the UK grounds for blocking the extradition are very technical. And so when you have a political extradition such as this one, Julian is forced into very technical arguments. Basically, the treaty allows extraditions. It doesn't allow extraditions for political offenses, for example. And Julian is being accused of a political offense under the Espionage Act, even formally under the formal blocks for the extradition. Julian should be freed. So it's really a question of the relationship between the two states. And we saw this very clearly when the US appealed the previous decision. So Julian initially won at the lower court that he would not be extradited in January 2021. And then the US appealed, and they appealed by kind of changing the goalposts entirely. They after losing, they then submitted what they called assurances, but it's not. It's anything but assurances. It's a total misnomer. And in those, basically, it's a letter between governments and the court, the High Court, which is the second level court, basically said that this is a matter between the two governments, and the courts are not going to second guess that. So even from there, you can see just the degree of that this is basically a political arrangement between countries, where other considerations, such as not disturbing the formal trust, the appearance of trust between systems is a weighs heavily. And so the person is caught, is kind of squashed under these bigger interstate relations, and so the UK, for example, says, well, any matters of fair trial and so on can be dealt with once he's extradited within the US system, because we trust that system. We trust the rule of law. This is one of the oldest, democracies and so on. So they kind of defer to these arguments of this is a civilized and long established legal system, and we're not going to second guess that as a legal system. And obviously, that's because it's reciprocal, right? Because the UK courts don't want the US to then say anything different, right? Like if the UK courts say the US courts are not trustworthy, then if it's in the reverse, it's not in the interest of the UK courts. So that's the kind of game that's going on. That's the dynamic between the two jurisdictions that you're up against, and it's not even very tangible if you're not like in the system and understanding that it's not necessarily about the case. So in Julian's case, of course, this should have not even reached the courts. The case is so absurd and outrageous that it should have been thrown out. But obviously, well, the relations between the two countries are very strong, and there's a lot of well, anyway, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Has much been made the in the courts of the fact that that Julian is not a U.S. citizen, nor has WikiLeaks ever operated from the United States? So going forward with this, so basically acknowledges that the U.S. can just grab anyone around the world and say, you've violated our laws, even if you've never been here.
Well, the way around it for the British courts is that the British courts say, well, our laws, our Official Secrets Act operates in the same manner. The problem, I think that okay, so one of the big problems is that this is a complex case, right? You have multiple jurisdictions, and then you have the UK kind of saying, oh, well, fair trial issues can be dealt with in the US. The US, maybe the US public, sorry, US journalists may be assuming that the courts here are actually looking at prima facie evidence or considering, the merits of the case, which isn't the case. And I think this has led to quite a serious degree of complacency in the United States. I saw, when Julian was first, when the initial superseding indictment came out. So Julian was initially arrested on a single charge, and then 17 more charges were laid with the superseding indictment in May 2019. When these Espionage Act charges were made public, I saw this kind of commentary that, oh, well, you see, they're not really serious about this. They're expecting the UK courts to throw this out because, of course, no one's going to go through with an extradition on Espionage Act charges, right? It's a political offense. It's about publication, etc. And then, but it wasn't thrown out, and the UK courts approved it, and that's because the UK is not as protective of free speech and press freedoms as the United States. And I think there's an assumption from the US end that that the same standards apply. And the problem is that the same standards don't apply in the United Kingdom. The Official Secrets Act is draconian, and there is not a presumption of First Amendment freedoms in this country. So the First Amendment is the presumption of, I'm talking about a cultural kind of presumption. Freedom of speech is not as hallowed a value in the United Kingdom as it is in the United States. And so if there has been a kind of complacency and trust that the UK system is going to stop this before it ends up in US courts, then that is a mistaken assumption, because basically the US culturally, constitutionally, has up until this prosecution held the gold standard for press freedom. There is no other country that has such a strong press freedom protection. This case, Julian's case in the United States, is a major shift. It's a dramatic, radical shift to undermining that First Amendment protection, to undermining press freedom, not only in the US, but globally. But that this kind of reliance that there's a culture favoring press freedom, that's not the case in the United Kingdom and in Europe. And so if there's a reliance that the UK is going to kind of protect press freedoms, especially in relation to a foreign jurisdiction, then it's just mistaken. So you have technical grounds, only technical grounds to withstand this extradition. And then secondly, a culture which is not as protective of press freedoms as in the United States. So the result is it's easier for the courts to extradite than what many assume to be the case. And it's weighted in favor of the United States because it's an uneven treaty, because it came after 9/11 and it was negotiated in a way that the UK is basically disadvantaged. So given all these kind of structural problems that imply that an extradition is easy from a legal standpoint for the United States, it's really just the political context that determines the outcome. Because on legal grounds, Julian should have won this. He can win this. He ought to win it. So you're just left with what is the political context, and is it in the interest of the UK? Is it in the interest of the Biden administration to pursue this? And I genuinely believe that it is not in the interest either of the UK or the Biden administration for this to be pursued. From the UK's perspective, the UK judicial system is under scrutiny. I mean, there's this justice should not only be done, but also be seen to be done. And in this case, you have Julian as the editor-in-chief, founder of WikiLeaks, having published the most significant journalistic publications in history, revealing the gravest of possible crimes, international crimes, specific cases of torture and rendition and war crimes and so on. And for those very publications, he now faces 175 years. That alone is a clear. It is the opposite of press freedom, right? This is what an authoritarian system does. It punishes reporters for publishing the truth about state-sanctioned crimes and grave crimes and tortures and so on. And then you have the outrageous nature of the case itself. That Julian is an Australian citizen. They're applying their Espionage Act beyond the U.S. territory into foreign jurisdictions. That they're saying that he's Australian and therefore he doesn't enjoy constitutional protections in the United States, and so on. And then you have things like revelations that the CIA has plotted to kidnap him and to assassinate him. Right. You can't possibly uphold a reputation for being a fair system if the person who is being extradited is the victim of a clear political persecution, of a conspiracy to be assassinated, of a conspiracy to rendition. He is the victim. And and if the UK system goes along with it, it is complicit. It is a tool furthering this political persecution. From the U.S. perspective, well, similarly, this is an attack on the First Amendment, an attack on the press, on the freedom of the press, domestically, internationally. The U.S. has opened itself up to being called out for jailing journalists. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel like you've seen a bit, speaking of the press, a bit of a shift in at least some of the mainstream press just recently? They're a mere 10 years too late, but just recently, the New York Times and several other mainstream outlets came forward and said that Julian should be released. And I think it was the first time they'd really done that publicly. Does this feel like a larger shift, or do you have any reason to or any knowledge on why they chose to do this now?
I think it's because they've kind of. I think it's because they've been forced to actually engage with the indictment. And, this is, I see this as it's a very good sign. And it's definitely a sign of a changing mood. It should have been done, as you say, at least 3 years ago when the indictment was clear, and because what they're saying in that editorial is clear from the indictment itself. So they're not saying anything different to what applied 3 years ago when the indictment was made public. So it's definitely the sign of a mood change, of pressure coming from other outlets, from readers and so on, saying do something about it. It's not enough, though. If these 5 major publications actually put their joint collective resources to not only just report on the hearings, but also dig, then Julian would probably not be in prison right now. If they had done this 3 years ago and then put their resources together to investigate. Right. You see, my standards, I say this as a bit of a joke, but it's not really a joke. The Guardian's coverage of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case is the standard that they should be applying to the extradition hearings of Julian. I mean, not only because, you see, the thing is, I hear sometimes that the public is kind of doesn't understand the case, and it's complex and so on. But that's the role of the media. The media's role is to explain the relevance, the importance, the detail in a way that the public can understand. Like, the public's not stupid. The problem is that it's not put, it's not presented enough. And there's also a message when you're putting things on the front page, day after day after day, that this matters to the publication. That's an editorial decision. And so that is what should be happening. And that hasn't happened. But there has been this joint editorial statement by these 5 big publications. And what they should do, obviously, is apply the Depp Heard level of coverage and put in their investigative resources to grill their sources about this about how this prosecution even came about how, the CIA's plots to assassinate Julian, to kidnap him, the UK involvement in that, in those plans. How much did the UK know? How much was it willing to do? All of these things that haven't been, they haven't come out. Really, there should be inquiries and so on. But anyway, we're not in a position of the media ignoring the case anymore. So that's a very positive shift. But it's not like they couldn't do more. Obviously, they can do more. And if it weren't for the way the press, the media, these very publications have behaved, I am sure that Julian would not have spent a single day in prison if they had been diligent and not participated in the concerted attack on Julian's reputation, originating in the same agencies that were also planning his assassination.
Yeah, if they gave 1/10 of the coverage to the persecution of one of the most important publishers to ever live, that they give to Prince Harry or something, this would be a completely different story right now. Truly, I don't even know what to call it. In many ways, it's spineless. It's impressively spineless to see your mainstream media, who should be defending their own jobs. I mean, this puts all of their jobs at risk by not defending Julian. Is amazing to see. I was wondering if, I know it must be tough through this whole thing for you and Julian to ever be shocked, but were you shocked when the revelations came out about the CIA planning a kidnapping, planning a possible assassination? I mean, of a journalist. It's mind blowing, even knowing what they're capable of. But.
Well, I'm very grateful to those journalists for actually investigating, because it came out of Pompeo's extraordinary press conference, his maiden speech, right? In I think it was April 2017, where he dedicated pretty much the whole entire speech to bringing down WikiLeaks. And it came after, two things. One, after WikiLeaks started publishing Vault 7 about the CIA, the biggest leak in CIA history. Yep. And after Julian had published an op-ed in the Washington Post. And in that op-ed, Julian explained why WikiLeaks was a publisher in the greatest tradition of the U.S. First Amendment and the intentions of the founding fathers. And Pompeo was so angered by this op-ed that he referred to it in his maiden speech. And then Julian wrote kind of a reply to Pompeo. So it's very interesting to see this this back and forth, which was at the time that Pompeo then sat down and started ordering what he called sketches and plans for Julian's assassination. And this is at the time that Julian was inside the embassy. And then as it was reported in this Yahoo News investigation, the plans to assassinate him were discussed in the White House at the highest levels, and the plans to kidnap him from the embassy were very elaborate. And it is, it's my belief that they were well advanced, and for various reasons, like thinking back on what was happening at the time, there were they were clearly trying to get him to leave the embassy, force him out before the arrest. I'm saying they were the Ecuadorian government was trying to make it so intolerable inside the embassy that he would voluntarily leave. Then during the we know since then, because of a criminal investigation in Spain concerning the security company that was working inside the embassy, that there were discussions among the security company staff about poisoning Julian, about leaving the door open, like the front door open, so that Julian could be abducted in a way that was deniable. So, they just happened to not be manning the door, and then someone came in and took him out. And these discussions were being had. So to me, it doesn't come as a surprise, because this was the real kind of atmosphere there was inside the embassy. It was a threatening atmosphere. It was very precarious and uncertain. And I really felt that anything could happen inside that embassy, that Julian's life was at risk, and that that his enemies, which were, we could feel their presence inside the embassy, was no longer a safe refuge, that they were capable of anything. And that was pretty clear from, I'd say, early 2018 onwards. And then Julian was he was gagged from the 28th of March 2018, a whole year before he was forcibly removed from the embassy. In March 2018, the embassy cut off his internet, cut off the phone connections, installed jammers that interfered with phone and internet, and then didn't allow him to have any visitors. And that was part of this process of isolating him, making it very difficult for him, and so on, and kind of making everything more basically they took control of the space and of his interactions from that moment on. So it seemed clear that there was a concerted plan being implemented to remove Julian in some way or another, and or to harm him. And what's really extraordinary is that we know so much about it, because you're talking about the CIA here, and they usually operate in secrecy, and we never really know what they were up to, and so on. And here, because we've had whistleblowers out of the Spanish security company come out, and police raids in Spain obtaining hard drives and evidence of what was going on, and then the 30 plus sources speaking to these journalists in the Yahoo News investigations team, that shouldn't be underestimated. And they said, these are people, and there's some people who are named, and very senior people in the National Security Council and the CIA and so on, basically saying that under Pompeo, the CIA went rogue, and that that this case, Julian's treatment, like the way Pompeo zoned in on WikiLeaks and Julian, was a major controversy within the Trump administration, was the major controversy of intelligence agency overreach, even within those intelligence agencies. That there was kind of the decision to treat a publisher as if it were a terrorist group was too much, even for those who work inside those agencies and do pretty unorthodox things on a regular basis. So this was really the CIA kind of secretly classifying WikiLeaks in such a way that they could avoid congressional oversight, and so didn't have to seek permissions to do the things that they were up to against Julian and WikiLeaks. And of course, a big component of this concerted attack on Julian, plans to kidnap and assassinate, and the actual spying on his legal meetings and obtaining his legal papers and instructing the security officers to obtain his DNA and our baby's DNA, and all of these things were part of a comprehensive attack plan. And a big component of that attack plan was to attack Julian's reputation and WikiLeaks' reputation, and plant stories with the media, and that's how you end up with things like the Guardian publishing a front page complete fabrication online, and then also on the front page of their printed paper. Like you had a catastrophic collapse of journalistic standards when it came to Julian and WikiLeaks, and the kind of stories that you would see come out were just like extraordinary. And there were lots of retractions, but the retractions almost didn't matter because one day there was a retraction, the same day there was another attack with an outrageous lie being published, and then you had to and that was constant, leading up to his arrest. And that was a concerted attack on Julian, trying to lower his political capital, trying to associate him with whoever, and harm him in every capacity so that it would be possible to arrest him.
Yeah, the retractions never really matter because these outlets know that the percent of people that read the retractions is minuscule compared to the number of people that read the initial article. So the damage is already done. You through all this, and you've just described, some of the horror show it's been. You've been incredibly strong, and I wanted to ask you, what gives you strength to both keep this up, but keep up the fight? I know you do endless number of interviews every day, and it's got to be phenomenally exhausting, not to mention raising kids, all of it. So I'm sure people would like to know where you get your strength.
Well, I'm incensed at what's going on and what's being done to Julian every single day. Every day that Julian is in prison is a failure of our. It's just a monumental failure of everything, right? It's just it can't go on, and I don't need any motivation because Julian is my husband, and I love him, and that's I don't need any additional motivation than that. I just want him home, but I do grow increasingly angry, rather than despondent or anything like that. No, I'm just angry that it hasn't been, that he's having to suffer this long. I mean, I feel, and this is not to say people should just sit back, but I feel that Julian will be free we have to keep building and making the demand for his release louder and persistent and insistent and universal. But to my mind, it's impossible for this to go on. He has to be free. So the fact that it's gone on for so long, it just seems like such a added insult. So that's where I'm not being very clear, but
no, I think people
I never grow despondent or I just feel more and more like, what more can I do? What more can be done? Who should I speak to? And I think, maybe the day he's free, maybe we will go and have a little holiday for a few weeks and just do nothing. But at the moment, I'm just trying to find more and more things to do until he's free.
Last question is, I know you and Julian have millions of supporters around the world. How can they best continue to help? Is there anything specific that you think they should be directing their efforts toward?
Well, there are many things that can be done. And it obviously depends on where they are. But okay, so there's speak to your friends, speak to your family, speak to your colleagues, inform everyone you know about this case. There are two books that are very good, which I highly recommend. One is Neil Smeltzer, The Trials of Julian Assange, and the second one is Stefania Maurizi, The Secret Power. These are two books that have come out in English recently, and that basically are deconstruct the persecution against Julian in detail, and they're both highly authoritative people. One is Neil Smeltzer, UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. Stefania Maurizi is a very renowned Italian investigative journalist, and this specific book has won, I think, 3 very highly regarded awards for investigative journalism. Join the newsletter on don'textraditeassange.com. That will keep you up to date with what's happening, and with interviews with me and actions and so on. And just stay informed, and please write to your representatives, especially if you're in Australia, in the UK or the United States, especially if you're in the United States. It's not difficult for politicians to take the right position on this. You have the New York Times, the Guardian, El País, Der Spiegel, Le Monde taking a position saying this is an attack on press freedom. It's bad for press freedom, and it harms their ability to do their job. This is like, you couldn't get more mainstream acceptance than that. And then obviously the United Nations and Amnesty International and so on, and all the Committee to Protect Journalists and so on, all the subject experts are on the same page here, that this is an attack on press freedom, and that it is a major detriment to our ability to live in a free and open society. So you have to interrogate politicians who are too afraid to come out and say that Julian should be freed and this case should be dropped. Who are they siding with if they're not siding with, the Committee to Protect Journalists and Reporters Without Borders and Amnesty and the New York Times, for God's sake? And you can donate. My Twitter account has a the pinned tweet has uh, the various links to different countries, and you can access that on the don'textraditeassange.com website as well. And in the United States, it's Assange Defense, but you can access all of this if you go to don'textraditeassange.com or my Twitter, which is Stella_Assange.
Stella underscore Assange. Thank you so much, Stella, for your time. And, we give you all our support, and please let Julian know we're all rooting and fighting for him as well. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
All right. There it is, folks. Stella Assange continuing the fight to free one of the most important publishers, journalists that this world has seen, and he's imprisoned for doing that and for revealing those truths for us, for trying to give us the information that we need to have a functioning democracy, a functioning system. He did that for us, and now he's being tortured for it, continues to be tortured for it. So thank you guys for all of your fight as well. And I will continue these interviews, assuming you guys keep enjoying them. They're at youtube.com/behindtheheadlines. Just last week, I also spoke to John Shipton, Julian Assange's father. You can catch that one. Chris Hedges, Scott Ritter. So many important voices over there. Vijay Prashad. So please watch those interviews at youtube.com/behindtheheadlines. And you can sign up at patreon.com/behindtheheadlines. And I will see you soon. I'm trying to remember. I have another interview this week, but I've already forgotten who it is. But anyway, I will see you again this week. Oh, and the new episode of Most Censored News, also at youtube.com/behindtheheadlines. That comes out either later today or tomorrow, and it's on the secret lives of weapons contractors. So don't miss that. All right, thanks again. Keep fighting.